Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are closing out this week with a look at Star Wars news. But before we dive into that, Jay, we want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
Absolutely. So we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram and sometimes X at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we're going to get into a little bit of news, and then we are going to talk some about music by John Williams, which is, of course, the documentary that came out on Disney Plus last Friday, and is all about John Williams and his impact on movie scores. So, we'll get to that in the last bit of this episode. But up first, we have a new trailer and key art for Skeleton Crew. And just as a reminder, the Skeleton Crew is coming out on December 3rd. It's got a 2-episode premiere. It's created by John Watts, who was the director for the Spider-Man trilogy that Sony recently put out. That's officially part of the MCU. So Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home, and Christopher Ford. Let's start off with the key art, Jerry. So we've got this poster that features the kids in the center, kind of the foreground there. And then we've got Jude Law's character and the droid that we've heard so much about in the background. And I'm guessing those are the pirates on speeder bikes at the bottom, right above the title card for the series, Skeleton Crew. What do you think about the key art?
Well, the first thing that hit me about this is that it's very reminiscent in the colors and the way that it sort of ombres between the blues and the oranges to the original 1977 Star Wars poster that has a lot of the blues in it. And so that was the first thing that hit me. But I mean, it's a good looking poster. You know, it's got all the elements and the characters as you ran down there of what we're anticipating seeing in the series itself. I do think it's interesting that the edges of the key art look very tattered and torn, you know, almost like they've been through it, you know, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Which I think is indicative of what the feel of the at least some of the series is going to be like.
So while you were talking, I leaned back to grab my water and I was like, wait a minute, if you lean far enough back, the image is kind of the outline of a skull, with the and you can kind of see the two eyes, the nose, and then where the pirates are on the speeder bike kind of forms the teeth. And you kind of get you're talking about the terror. So I wonder if they're really going through the treasure map motif with this poster with the tattered edges and the skull. Plus you got these big 2 light slashes going through that form an X.
Oh yeah. Good call. Absolutely. Yeah. Now that you say that, because I did see the 2 eyes that almost look like droid eyes on there, but I didn't put that together that's a skull. But duh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it looks like eye sockets there with that, and then where the one character's shoulder/sleeve looks kind of like the nose area. It could be a droid head. I'm not sure what they're going for there. And I'm sure that'll be more apparent as we actually see this series. So that's the key art. But then we get this new trailer. And I'm curious to hear what you think about this. A couple of things that stood out to me right away were the music. It was pop synth as opposed to any type of orchestral fare on it. Kind of reminded me of something that maybe Guardians of the Galaxy would have done, as opposed to what we're used to with Star Wars, especially as we're getting ready to talk about John Williams. And then it really, my overall vibe for this is much more like coming of age kids go on an adventure, get lost, and gotta get home type of a thing. 80s stuff like that. It's set in a futuristic Earth than it is Star Wars.
Yes.
Okay, well, I was going to ask you what you thought about that, but you just answered it there.
In a
Yeah, I mean,
nutshell, yes.
because it starts off with what
Mhm.
appears to be some sort of school detention scene in all of
Right.
this.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure how to feel about Skeleton Crew. I mean, I've been really excited for a new series and just, of
Mhm.
course, always thirsting for new Star Wars and new content and that type of thing. But yeah, you pointed out a couple of the things that stood out to me as well. It's very much just it's like a suburban Star Wars is the easiest way that I
Mhm.
can put it. And I caught as far as the music goes, was that like Major Tom, the song Major Tom, I swear, or like a U2 song or something like that in there, because I thought to myself, "I know this song. This is a take on something
Hmm.
that I'm familiar with already." But yeah, like I said, I'm not sure how I feel about some of the imagery in here because it kind of looks like Star Wars, but it doesn't. If I didn't know that it was Star Wars, I don't know if I would have latched onto that right away, especially because the fact that until the words come up, even the words are different. The lettering's different. The font is different. It's very,
Yeah.
very 80s Star Wars, but not Star Wars at the same time. So
R-
it's different.
Right. The lettering, the font that they chose to use in this trailer was the next thing I was going to bring up. And when we talked about the last trailer for Skeleton Crew, we talked about some of this stuff about how this very suburban feel that, they got streets, there's lawns. It looks like
Right.
people wandering around about a neighborhood. And this thing has always been talked about as being, akin to the Goonies or some sort of ambient entertainment type of film. And it's completely not shying away from that. To the extent that it feels like it more like that than it does like Star Wars at all.
Mhm.
And I'm with you. I can't tell what I think about it. I'm curious about this show. I plan on watching it because I watch everything that's Star Wars.
Hmm.
And I'm not I'm not turned off by this trailer or anything like that, but at the same time, if it didn't have like X-wings in the end, and if it didn't have a few recognizable Star Wars aliens in it,
Right.
I'm not sure where to come away with this saying, yeah, that this is a teaser for a new Star Wars project
Mhm.
at
Mhm.
all.
No, I'm totally with you. And when you said Guardians of the Galaxy,
Mhm.
I kind of thought that as well, that little bit of vibe.
Mhm.
And yeah, I feel the same way, just to, reiterate what we've already said. But of course, I'll keep an open mind. And I just hope that in intentionally kind of straying from the usual Star Wars vibe, that it doesn't stray too far.
Right. And this kind of goes back to a couple different conversations that we've had recently. And which is one, there's been a lot of turnover and problems getting Star Wars movie projects over the finish line. And part of the speculation that we've talked about of that is that Lucasfilm is very particular in what they want out of a Star Wars film, which kind of cripples the creativity of some of the people that they brought in to make Star Wars projects on
Mhm.
that. But what has been the most critically acclaimed Star Wars thing in the last several years?
The Mandalorian.
With that and Andor.
True.
And
Mhm.
Andor is very different than any of the other Star Wars projects that we saw. And when I was talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, the other thing that occurred to me is like, what is one of the things that's made Marvel successful is that not all their movies necessarily have that same format, that same feel. They've allowed a lot of these directors to come in and tell a story in the Marvel universe that doesn't necessarily follow all the same elements, all the same story patterns. And they've had a lot of success with that. It's not been as successful lately. But I mean, just think about something like, the Winter Soldier, Captain America, the Winter Soldier versus Guardians of the Galaxy versus Black Panther or Doctor Strange.
Mhm.
Very different style movies. They're all
Right.
superhero movies. They're all fit into that genre, but different styles. Whereas I don't know that, the Star Wars movies for the most part stray from their elements in that may. So anyways, long story short, getting to the point, I can't help but wonder if maybe this is, it's not getting me excited as a Star Wars project right off the bat. But once we get into it, maybe this will be a good thing for Star Wars, kind
Mhm.
of introducing a new story format in there. And the other thing makes me think is like, Sean Levy has said that Kathleen Kennedy wants him to do a Sean Levy film.
Mhm.
So maybe they're kind of getting away from the George Lucas formula of making a Star Wars project. As much as we love that and as successful it's been, perhaps that's what Star Wars needs right now.
Well, I have 2 thoughts on that.
Mhm.
One, just to go back to what you said about Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm gonna be honest, the first time I saw the original Guardians of the Galaxy, I hated it. I
Mm.
thought it was a slap in the face to everything Marvel, and it took me a really long time to warm up to that type of humor and the placement of what that was trying to do within the MCU, which of course, since I've completely reconciled with it and I think it's brilliant.
Mm.
But with Andor, I think that even though it was so different, it was still at its core Star Wars. And there's a certain, I don't know, Dennis, I just feel like there's a certain recipe for Star Wars that sometimes fresh can be good, but you have to be careful because I feel that Star Wars fans are going to not want to change that recipe too much. And,
Well, yes, that's, you know, here's the thing. The Star Wars fans are fickle. And, what's the meme that's always going around? Is like, yeah, I want something new. Okay, here's something new. Well, not that,
right.
and it's,
No one
but
hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans.
right, something more similar to what we got. Okay, it was like, well, that's just the same movie we already had. Well, it's,
But that's what you asked for. So,
so you
no, I
can't
get
win
you.
on those type of things. And I hear
I
you.
see your point.
But when I think back to Andor, that was not a series that was replete with a lot of blaster fights or lightsabers. There was one space action scene across the entire series when it
Mhm,
came down to it. Well, that two, but one that involved like conflict for the most part. And, that was what, 12 episodes or something like that? I mean, it was a very different formula than what we're used to with Star Wars. And honestly, if you took out TIE fighters, if you took out stormtroopers, if you took out a lot of those type of imagery, I don't think it looks like Star Wars at all when it comes down to it. That being said, it relied on characters from, a major character from Row One, Cassian Andor and Mon Mothma, which helps make a Star Wars story. I liked it. It did have a message of hope when it got to the end of the whole thing, but it's considerably different than the Mandalorian or Ahsoka or Obi-Wan Kenobi or the Book of Boba Fett,
mhm,
which are much more aligned with the usual Star Wars brand of storytelling there.
mhm, mhm.
And so anyway, my point being is that I think one of the things that might actually help this out is that they are going for an 80s vibe. And that's when Star Wars was in its heyday. And so we'll see how that works.
Mhm. No, that's a great point, and I
Mhm.
do hope that it knocks our socks off because I'm excited for it.
Mhm.
I'm excited to see where it's going to go, and I really hope that it lives up to my expectations. I think you and I both sometimes we raise the bar so high, and we both have said that in the past that we have to be careful sometimes going in not to
Yeah.
expect too much.
Well, and I'm always hesitant to try to judge anything Star Wars on its first viewing because for that very reason, my
Mhm.
expectation. And so it's the second viewing when I got my expectations adjusted, and I'm not. The thing was like with the sequel trilogy, it's like, well, who's going to die? And you're so
Yeah.
nervous going into one of those movies about, is Han going to die? Well, then he did in the Force Awakens,
Mhm.
whatever. So when you sit down and watch the second time, it's like, I know this is coming. So you've accepted that. Let's see how this movie plays out now. And so, then things work out pretty well. But we didn't really talk about any other details of this trailer. So let's do that real quick because we're about halfway through it, or as normally our usual news episode. Um, but yeah, so we talked about kind of the vibe. We talked about the school detention scene at the beginning. Things we've seen before. They kind of discover a ship and they take off in it and they get lost. And then there's this ancient droid on board who's kind of talking about pirates and adventure. The whole thing ends with them looking at like a lost treasure, which is kind of interesting. And then we see some pirates attacks, and then Jude Law's character is like, "You're lost. I'll help get you home. We'll find a partnership. We have to go right now because there's pirates attacking." I kind of feel like that was like lines from different areas that are being strung together, but we'll see what happens. Anything of that stand out to you?
Well, just some of the things that we had already talked about that it kinda has that very, 80s Goonies kind of feel to it just right off
Mhm.
the bat.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I'm interested. I certainly am, but I'm not as excited for this as I was, say, The Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka, et cetera, et cetera. But hey, another thing to watch. So
Absolutely.
let's
And
do
we'll
it.
give it a shot.
All right. Well, 2 episodes coming on December 3rd. So, all right. This next story is just kind of bizarre, and I'm having a hard time making it work. But there's been a recent revelation, and Variety, amongst other outlets reporting on this, that George Lucas's original idea for the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi in The Phantom Menace was that Liam Neeson was going to be playing a character named Obi-Wan Kenobi who was going to die, and then his apprentice, played by Ewan McGregor, named Qui-Gon Jinn, was then going to take up that name as he
Yeah.
trained Anakin Skywalker. And so it was going to put a whole twist on who Obi-Wan Kenobi really was, but then they dropped it all at the last minute. What is your feeling on this?
Well, I had a hard time wrapping my head around this because, I mean, one of the first things I thought was, okay, in a way that's kind of really cool and brilliant because it puts a completely different twist on what we thought we knew.
Mhm.
But then again, I'm thinking, like, how can you possibly reconcile that with the fact that everyone else knew that Obi-Wan wasn't Qui-Gon or Qui-Gon wasn't Obi-Wan? And how do you explain that? And how does the Jedi Council go along with that? Kind of a thing. I mean, I could understand if it was something that maybe Qui-Gon, AKA Obi-Wan, had to go into hiding right away, like something akin to Order 66. But I mean, we're talking about the height of the Jedi right here, just before everything starts falling apart, obviously 20 years later. But yeah, it's just weird to me. But what do you think? I'm stumbling over my words, but
No, I understand what you're saying. I mean, to me, it was kind of like he was doing it to honor his master, not like he was trying to disguise the fact that Obi-Wan had died. And it was, it's kind of like taking on the mantle. Like
Mhm,
we've seen it in comics all the time. Batman, Bruce Wayne dies, and then Dick Grayson takes up the mantle of Batman for a little while before Bruce Wayne comes back. That type of a thing. But to me, it's just kind of like, what was the point
yeah,
of
yeah,
this?
yeah.
Every story that I've read and the different outlets about this is like, oh, so it would have a major twist. Like, to what end? I mean,
Mhm,
other than just kind of like a twist for twist's sake, how else does it impact the storytelling?
mhm,
It's one thing in Empire Strikes Back when Darth Vader comes out of nowhere and informs Luke that Darth Vader is in fact his father. I mean, that's a huge twist with major storytelling and plot ramifications. But Obi-Wan not necessarily being who he thought he was, but he's still a Jedi and he's still trained Anakin. I don't know that that really made any difference. And quite frankly, I think it made perfect sense not to go through with that. It seems like an idea that's kind of half baked. As
mhm,
brilliant as George Lucas is, I don't see that this accomplishes anything when it comes to
mhm.
the storytelling.
No, I agree. And, a couple things on that as well. When you said basically like taking up the mantle, no, I totally get that. But I'm with you. I'm almost wondering if it's one of those things that, one of those nuggets of ideas that George Lucas had that obviously didn't go any farther than the quote unquote drawing board, but people are just latching onto it just to have something to talk about. You know what I mean?
Sure,
So you
sure.
could have all kinds of different ideas about the way things could have been, but that doesn't mean that it's a plot twist.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. I don't get how this is a twist. I mean, other
Mhm,
than it changes what we know about Obi-Wan Kenobi, but okay. But does that change the way you feel about Obi-Wan Kenobi and A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi? No. I mean, not for me, if that would have been the
mhm,
case.
mhm,
So I don't know. It just seems like a twist without a purpose. And maybe there was something in mind that George Lucas had, in store for that, but then just decided not to pursue throughout the rest of the movies. But I don't know. It
sure,
just kind of seemed like bizarre was the way I thought of this one.
yeah.
So
For me, I guess I just kind of marked it up to the same sort of idea that Luke Skywalker was almost Luke Starkiller,
mm,
that there were all these ideas that were rolling around, and some of them just never made it past the drawing table, and for good reason.
sure, but a name change because Mace Windu was originally one of the character names for A New Hope as well, and
Mhm,
he recycled the name and put it in the Phantom Menace. That's fine, but a name change Star Killer Skywalker, what does that matter?
Mhm.
And originally Han Solo was going to be a green, scaly looking alien, and things like that. And so they changed. That's a bigger change when you made him a
Mhm.
human and possible love interest for Princess Leia. The notion of changing Obi-Wan's this identity swap in the first movie, again, it seems like you're trying to make a big deal out of something that ultimately serves no purpose.
Mhm.
So anyways, that's my
Mhm.
thought.
No, I
But
get it.
yeah.
And it makes me think of things like, originally Jabba was a human, and as we know, he was turned into a slug later on. So,
Yeah, but I got the feeling that at least that was because of the state of the technology at the time, and that actor
sure.
was always intended as a stand-in for Jabba.
Mhm.
I mean, even there was it may have been the novelization or somewhere that character was kind of like you know, the closest comparison I can think of is like in Lord of the Rings, how there's the hand of Sauron, the mouth of Sauron, and stuff like that. That this guy was a stand-in for Jabba the Hutt, and
Mhm.
so when you saw him, he was speaking for Jabba.
Mhm.
Okay, whatever. So, all right, I don't want to spend too much more time on that. It's just a weird, bizarre story that I
Well,
couldn't help but.
all of the could have beens and would have beens, Zeb was supposed to be Chewbacca, for example,
Yeah, that
you could
design,
go
right?
on and on.
Exactly. All right, well, that brings us to music by John Williams. This is the documentary about John Williams that we've been talking about for a while. It originally debuted at one of the film festivals. I can't remember which one it was. It's been exceptionally well reviewed by critics all over the place. And then it was finally made available to the public on Disney Plus on November 1st. And I finally got a chance to watch it. I know you did too, Jay. What did you think about this one overall?
Absolutely fantastic. And I have to say, I'm so glad that this was filmed and produced while John Williams is still alive,
Hmm.
because so many times you get things like this that are, posthumous and in celebration of the life after that life has ended. And this particular celebration just pays so much tribute to this man that I will be honest, I had no idea how deep his roots went,
Hmm.
and I knew obviously that John Williams has done so many things, but I had no idea that it went so deep. I didn't know that he did some of the themes that he did for different TV shows back in the day. I had no idea that he was, like a jazz composer. I had no idea, there's so many different things. And my husband and I were watching this together and we're like, "Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, like this is amazing and that's amazing." And it was just I couldn't get enough of this. And I think at the end, I was just thought to myself, this is just proof in the pudding that having something to fuel your soul is what keeps you young
Hmm.
because the man's out there still playing golf for
Yeah,
Pete's sake.
not exceptionally well, but he is playing.
Right. I mean, I was so impressed with this. I feel like I need to go back and watch it again because there were so many things that were shared that, it was just a laundry list of all of these amazing pieces that he had done. And I was just flabbergasted by the idea that he had done all of this by hand. And, just writing notes for one instrument, let alone for an entire orchestra. And then, the epitome of that coming to fruition where he said, and I don't want to give too much of it away for anybody that wants to watch it, but just the fact that, he did all this with a piano and his thoughts. And it wasn't until he actually got an orchestra together to play it that he finally got to hear what he did.
Hmm.
And I just, oh my gosh, it's just, I was in awe the entire time. I really was. It was such a good documentary. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we're going to get some spoiler stuff here in just a second. It's not a narrative thread, so I don't feel bad really about spoiling anything because we're not giving away. Plot twist: John Williams, in fact, directed or composed the music for Star Wars. Okay, if you didn't already know, no,
Spoiler.
I was amazed by this. As Star Wars fans and movie fans in general, we already know he's had a major impact on movie scores. However, I did not realize it wasn't just the movie scores he had an impact on. It was the extent to which he had an impact on the creation of movies, how widely well regarded he was even early on in his career. I'm not just talking about like recently, like everyone seems to have caught on to how important he was. No, going back 40 years, people held him in high esteem. Everyone in the movie business, directors, other composers, actors, even in that. And then how responsible he is for leading the acceptance of the movie score. Because one of the things that stands out to me about this was, he became the director of the Boston Pops for
Mhm.
the orchestra there in Boston. And he got into a serious clash with his musicians, and he resigned because they were hissing at him over his music selections. And they were, and he was very polite about this and political, and saying, that, the professionalism with which they were he, kind of made a comment about their professionalism about the orchestra. And so he resigned from this director of the Boston Pops, only to come back 6 weeks when everything got worked out. And he really brought this style of music back into the mainstream
Mhm.
so that orchestras were playing it again. And I can't remember
Yeah.
which one of the composers at the end, or maybe Seth MacFarlane, of all people, at the end was like, in time, we're going to be celebrating the works of John Williams the way we do Beethoven
Yes.
and such. And and that's just very profound to hear.
It really is, and what a legacy
Mhm.
he's left for all of us, and just in his lifetime with everything. I mean, just like you said, the impact on just our collectivism is and how we experience movies and TV series and, even things like football and what was it? NBC was another one that he did the theme for. I had no idea he did
The
those kinds of
Olympics.
things. Well, I knew he did the Olympics because
Yeah.
I had to play that song when I was in, like, 8th grade, and
Yeah.
it's the hardest piece ever, let me just tell you. Um, but but yeah, I mean, I was just floored by all of the things that and the elements and just the fact that he and Steven Spielberg are like besties. I just thought that was so cool. That made my heart smile. And I didn't know that his one of his sons was the lead singer of Toto. I'm over there going, "Hold the line," and I was, "Oh my gosh," like, all of these little things that I didn't know and was just so cool.
Well, one of the points that Steven Spielberg made really, really impressed me, and that was he was talking about Jaws, and it was not the first time that John Williams had collaborated with Steven Spielberg, but he brought him in to do Jaws, and Steven Spielberg was talking about, he was like, so I was working with this robot shark shark prop that did not work, which limited the amount of times they were able to use. I think like Bruce, what they called the shark in that prop in Jaws,
Mhm.
which limited how much they could actually use it during production. But John Williams came up with that famous theme that we're all familiar with, da dun da dun
Mhm.
da dun da dun, 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 that thing. And it's funny because everybody did that. Like every director or composer at some point was humming a John Williams theme over the course
Yes.
of this musical documentary. But the point that Spielberg was making is that when they created this cue and this theme for Jaws, it was a stand-in for the actual character.
Mhm.
And so you didn't have to rely on having a visual representation because you had the music. You knew the shark was there when you heard those sounds. And that is the impact great composing can have on a movie.
Right, right, and I think they mentioned that this is the basic genesis of how themes for characters began,
Mhm.
as far as having those different things, and they talked about that with Princess Leia and with Yoda's theme, and you just get that feeling as soon as you hear it, you know what character it is.
Mhm. Another favorite moment of mine was they had Ki Hu Kwan on the show. And I think they may have been at the premiere for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny or something else having to do with Indiana Jones. And John Williams was sitting right behind him. And they hadn't seen each other since they worked on Temple of Doom. But John Williams knew who he was and leaned forward. And he's like, did you realize that, Short Round had a theme? And he was like, yeah,
Of
of course
course.
I did. And they both started humming it. And he goes, I'm one of the few actors on the planet that has the fortune of saying, I've had a theme composed for me for one of my characters by John Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that is so cool.
It is.
And I'd never thought of that as an honorific, but he's so right. I mean, how
Oh,
much
yeah.
would you love to have John Williams compose a theme for you for something that you've done?
Oh, man. I couldn't even imagine. Couldn't even imagine it happening. But yes, here we are with those that are in that very honored presence for sure.
Hmm.
And one other thing for me too that I just think is incredible out of this whole thing is the fact that this was obviously all done by one person by hand over this piano, note by note, writing this out. And they were talking about how, you could synthesize music and
Hmm.
you can tell AI or a computer or whatever to come up with whatever. But that's really not what music is all about. It's great to have, and it's just like anything else, it's great to have help with some type of technology, but I almost fear to think that when composers like John Williams are gone, that we're not going to have that soul that music had at one time. You know what I mean? And I almost fear for that in the future because it's just such an incredible skill and one that is just so rare.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I also know that we've had the likes of Michael Giacchino, John Powell, Ludwig Göransson working on Star Wars projects lately, and they've turned out some incredible stuff as
Yeah. Well,
well.
yeah,
And
and Ludwig
so,
Göransson also, he's very, very organic in the
mhm,
things that he creates as well. So he's another one that I just think is absolutely brilliant.
yeah,
But
and I'm
yeah.
very fond of a lot of stuff that Giacchino's done, whether it's been Star
Mhm.
Wars or elsewhere.
Right.
Um, One of the other things that stood out to me about this was a couple of the things that came out around his work on Schindler's List.
Mhm.
And normally, the collaboration between Spielberg and John Williams was that Spielberg would get a chunk of the movie together, he show it to Williams, Williams would start doing the composing. But because Schindler's List came out in the same year as Jurassic Park, Williams was working on Jurassic Park while Spielberg was working on Schindler's List. Both Spielberg movies in this case.
Yeah.
So Spielberg had pretty much filmed Schindler's List, and then he showed it John Williams, and John's like, he got up and he took a walk for 5 minutes. And then this was actually at some event that he and Spielberg were at, but they caught part of it and used it in this documentary. And John came back to Stephen and said, "You've made a really incredible film, but I think you need a much better composer than me to make the music for it." And Stephen's response was, "You're right, but all those people are dead."
Yeah, and they both had a good laugh about that one.
Yeah. And then the other thing about Schindler's List, another comment that was made that I really liked was that so Stephen and Kate Upshaw, his wife, went up to see John, who was, I can't remember where, in Boston working on the music. And John started playing that theme from Schindler's List. He didn't get through the first 5 notes and Kate started crying. And
Mhm.
apparently with like 9 notes after that, Stephen started crying.
Yeah.
And then within 2 bars after that, John was crying. And so it's just, just talking about the impact that movie, that music had on it. And then the violin piece, I can't remember the name of the violin player, but it was like world renowned
Oh, Yo-Yo
violin.
Ma?
No, not, he's a cello player.
Oh, he's the
Um,
cello, okay.
yeah, I wish, oh shoot, I wrote it down somewhere, but I misplaced that. But anyways, they got this guy and to play it. And what was funny is like, John Williams called because he'd been wanting to work on a John Williams score for a very long time. And John's like, well, put a pin in that and we'll find a project
Oh,
someday.
that one, yeah.
Yeah. And then
Mhm.
John called and was like, "I think I have something for you." And so he told him what it was. And this guy said, "Yeah, I'll think about it." And so they hung up, and then he told his wife, "Is like, yeah, John Williams called me and he wants me to play violin on this piece." And his wife is like, "Let me get this straight. John Williams called you to play violin on this score, and you said you would think about it?" So he called back the next day and told John he'd do it. Um,
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's good stuff. That's
I
good
could go
stuff.
on and on about this, and there's
Me too.
one more story I want to tell, and that was Home Alone, the
Yes,
score.
I thought about that one too.
Oh, you want
Mhm.
to tell it then?
Sure, yeah, just the fact that they had another composer that was set to do the music, and then that fell through, or something had happened. I can't remember exactly what they said had happened. And so John just stepped in, and honestly, that's what makes that movie. And they say
Mhm.
that, from to this day, that is what makes it so incredibly magical and the way that it is. And John just has such a unique ability to, as you were saying earlier too, to understand the characters and the feeling for what is supposed to be conveyed
Mhm.
through the music. And so, yeah, and I'd never thought about that. And you always think of Home Alone and like it's the Christmas movie and it's got the Christmassy kind of music, but it really is something that just hits you in your soul. It really does.
Yeah, and the other thing about was that story that I really loved is that the director for Home Alone, he was telling the story about how they lost a composer because there was some sort of a conflict. He was working on something else, and so John Williams' agent called him up and said, "Well, I've got my client, John Williams, would be available to do this if you're interested." And the director's like,
Oh, what?
"It's like, am I interested in John
Right.
Williams doing work for my movie? Yeah, I'm interested." So, oh, I'll also correct myself. I kept calling Kate Capshaw Kate Upshaw, and I meant Kate Capshaw. So apologies for the mistake. Um, but yeah, so I don't know. There's so many good stories
Yeah.
in that doc. It was longer than I thought. For some reason, I thought it was gonna be like an hour, but it was an hour and 45 minutes.
Mhm.
But it is so incredibly worth it. I hope it gets recognized at the Oscars. Um, it's an incredible testament to John Williams' legacy. And I just couldn't believe how moved I was by the whole thing.
Yeah, it truly is, and I'm with you. I didn't realize he was in the military,
Mhm.
and, just his entire life is just so incredible.
Mhm.
It really is.
And it's not that I don't like hearing about like people's early part, their upbringing and stuff like that, but I really want to hear about their careers. And
Mhm,
so while I was glad to get some of those early details about where he came from, the fact that his father was a drummer and had worked on scores as a drummer,
mhm.
and then John Williams was a pianist, working on scores before he became the composer for a lot of those scores. But really getting to hear about how he did some of these things and the impact he had and how revered he is in that industry, it was just something. And then getting to hear all those famous clips of all that music that we're familiar with in one place was just so incredibly well done.
Right, I know, my jaw just kept dropping open the whole time, just, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe he did this, and he did this, and he did this."
Mhm,
Yep,
mhm.
yep,
So
I need to watch it again, honestly.
yeah, so the official Podcast Stardust review is 2 thumbs up. Go check it out.
Yes,
So,
yes.
all right. Well, then, that was fun. I'm glad we got to talk about that. I didn't believe we could make an entire episode out of it, so we decided to go ahead and incorporate it into a news episode, and I think that was the right way to go, because people need to go see it for themselves. We told some of the best
Mhm.
stories, but there's still plenty of other good ones, and it's like I said, there's nothing really to spoil when it comes down to it, unlike a narrative that you get in the movie or something like that. So thanks. That's why we decided to do it the way we did. Thank you all for joining us for it. So we hope you enjoyed this discussion here on Podcast Stardust and our look at the trailer for Skeleton Crew and our thoughts about that show coming up, and then our discussion of music by John Williams. And if you did, then we hope you'd consider liking, subscribing, following the podcast on whatever podcatcher that you use, and leaving us ratings and reviews. Those things are always appreciated. Once you've done that, then go check out the home of Podcast Artists on retrozap.com, which has our entire catalog of shows and also features such other great podcasts such as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Case Files, Animaniacast, Brews and Blasters, Dork Lair, Doomcast, Enjoy Stuff, Love, Death, and Robots Plus, Superhero Suite, and Warp Trails. Before we get into our social media contacts, which Jay reminded you about one more time, we got a new iTunes review what I wanted to share on the show.
Nice.
And this one is entitled My Star Wars Go-To Podcast and is by Run Kindle Run, who,
Yay.
yeah, and he writes, this podcast is a must for any Star Wars fan. Dennis and Jay dive deep into all corners of this Star Wars universe, from comics, books, and movie analyses to animation and celebration discussions. You can stay up to date on the latest products with Jay's monthly segment World Between Worlds and listen in on the latest Star Wars news. There's something here for everyone. Join my friends and subscribe to get all the goodness from the galaxy far, far away. So thank you,
Aw,
Kindle. We
thank
appreciate that.
you. Yes, Kendall's such a great guy. Thanks,
He
Kendall.
is. Definitely is. All right, Jay, now that we've read that great review, I want to remind everybody else where we can be found on the internet, social media, and elsewhere.
Of course. So we are very easily found on Instagram and Facebook at Podcast Stardust. And you can share the show with your friends there. You can also leave us reviews, as Dennis was just mentioning, on iTunes. Spotify also supports reviews, as does YouTube and YouTube Music, which we are also found. And we would love it if you would like, subscribe, and share that with your friends as well. And those do also support some interaction. So if you want to do any kind of commenting or that type of thing on there, you can definitely do that. We also have some Pinterest boards where you can find all kinds of fun Star Wars ideas for yourself. And if you're up for some real-time chatter, we do have a Discord room on the RetroZap Discord server. So Dennis was just mentioning and running down all of the shows on RetroZap, and all of them also have their own rooms. So if you hit up the link in our show notes, you'll find all of the amazing Discord goodness over there. And another link that's in our show notes is to our TeePublic store. So if you'd like to snag some Podcast Stardust swag, you can head over there and pick up one of 7 different show logo designs. And we have everything from t-shirts and sweatshirts to coffee mugs and home goods and pretty much everything in between. And even maybe some stocking stuffers for the upcoming holiday. So once again, hit up that link in our show notes for TeePublic.
All right, before we go, you want to let everyone know what's going on with the world of cosplay?
Sure. So right now I'm actually gearing up for a Maker Faire event at a local library for this weekend. And so that'll be an interesting thing. I'm going to be making some of my cosplay builds available so that the public can come and ask questions and interact with some of the things that I've made and just kind of see some of the things that I've done. So I'm really excited to share some of my knowledge there. So I'll be outlining that on my Instagram, which is j.snipscosplay. So you can catch that as well as all of my other adventures as Ahsoka, Hera, the Fourth Sister, my original concept Mandalorian build, Leia, and a whole lot more.
Okay. Well, upcoming on the show on Monday, we are reviewing another episode of The Clone Wars. So make sure you join us for that. And then on Wednesday, we've got a bunch of trivia left for The Phantom Menace. So we're going to start working on running that out before we get to the end of the year. So that starts next Wednesday. And with that said, thanks for listening to episode 805 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be with you.